Welcome to Compass Points, the weekly podcast for CompassKnox.com. CompassKnox.com is your best source for news and politics in Knoxville and Knox County. Your hosts today are Scott Barker and Jesse Mayshark, the founders of CompassKnox.com. You can find their daily in-depth coverage and subscribe at CompassKnox.com. The Compass Point podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Almost an Agreement. Almost an Agreement is a layman's attempt to get a handle on the workings in government and politics that we deal with every day. Check them out at almostanagreement.com or subscribe for free on your favorite podcast provider. If you'd like to learn more about the topics discussed on today's podcast, go to CompassKnox.com and subscribe for in-depth coverage and much more. And now, here are your hosts, Scott and Jesse from CompassKnox.com.
Hello and welcome again to Compass Points, the weekly podcast where we talk about Knoxville politics, government, business, education, really whatever gets our attention. I am Jesse Mayshark, co-founder and co-publisher of Compass, back this week after missing last week. And I am joined, as usual, by Scott Barker, co-publisher and co-founder of Compass, who carried the burden of the podcast last week in my absence. Good job last week, Scott. How are you doing this week?
Oh, it was a heavy, heavy burden, too, let me tell you.
Well, fortunately, you had our intern, Owen McCarthy, here to help out a little bit.
He did help out. Helped out a great deal. So, as did Lord Seth.
Lord Seth.
He jumped in a couple of times.
Our producer, Seth Barber. Always happy to hear from him as well.
Yeah. But anyway, you asked how I was doing. I'm doing fine. Looking forward to a good summer. So.
Yeah. Good summer that's already starting to heat up, literally. And also heat up politically. You like that little segue there?
Yeah, that works.
We are going to talk about the upcoming August election this week. We are also going to talk about interesting discussion and a vote with more to come on the school board having to do with sexually oriented materials in school libraries. The city of Knoxville has issued a request for proposals for an interesting piece of property that it happens to own in East Knoxville. Speaking of schools, there's some angst among school employees about those large raises that we have talked about here before. Not everybody is getting them. We'll talk a little bit about that. And to start off, Scott, you wrote this week about progress in this has been an ongoing issue, but the city and county are establishing a task force to consider the possibility of what they call an alternative response model for emergencies involving mental health crises. What's going on there?
Yeah, well, they are finally moving forward with it. They wanted to. There were not a lot of people, at least on city council, talked about wanting to, take politics out of it as much as possible, and so what they've done is they formed a task force. They named everybody to the task force, almost everyone, and they have tapped the United Way to facilitate meetings of the task force, and the United Way has a history of, experience with doing things like that, mediating disputes or getting people together who don't necessarily agree on things to begin with, and finding common ground and doing all that facilitation stuff. And they've got a real experienced facilitator who's going to do that. That's Crystal Armstrong Brown. And she's going to be the one to she's not in charge of the committee, she's just facilitating the committee. So but the committee's made up of lots of stakeholders. Both county mayor Glenn Jacobs and city mayor India Kincannon have representatives from their offices. the Knoxville Police Department, Knoxville County Sheriff's Office, 911 Center, the McNabb Center, the Health Department, Community Action Committee, MTAS, the Municipal Technical Advisory Service of the University of Tennessee, will be there as well, and Knoxville Heart, which is the community organization that has really pushed the creation of an alternative response model. And what they're charged with doing is, over the next year, they are going to look at alternative response. They'll be looking at what other cities do, what other, all kinds of things like that. They can bring in experts. There's no real agenda yet for what they're going to do. That'll be determined through the facilitation process, and then over the course of the year, they're going to develop a model for what a program would look like.
And when we say alternative response, we're particularly talking about teams of people who could respond, like say a call comes into 911, somebody's having a mental health crisis and like a family member is calling in, and it's somebody who is not being violent or threatening, but is in, themselves in crisis. And the idea is to have a team that can respond that does not include an armed law enforcement officer, right?
Right. The city of Knoxville has what they call a co-response program, and that pairs a police officer with a mental health professional, and it's a very small program. Started out in 2020 with just one team. They're authorized for up to 4 teams, but the last I checked, they weren't fully staffed on the 4 teams, but which is shocking for the Knoxville Police Department, since it's 60 or so officers short, and also it's there's kind of a shortage of mental health workers as well. So anyway, that program was put together. It's been fairly successful, if you define success as them responding, getting people at least aware of the resources they need, stabilizing them, and without actually arresting them. There are very few arrests have been made, but there are a lot of people, and this is not just here in Knoxville, but all over the country, who think that it's less intimidating and less stressful for the person going through the crisis if there's not a police officer there. So this team, alternative response, would have an EMT or a medic of some sort paired with the mental health professional, and they would respond. One of the things is they started out kind of a proposal for the city to do. Then it's most people on city council were more comfortable putting it in context with the overall strategy addressing mental health issues, and team with the county on it. So this will end up being probably a county-wide response team, response program. But as David Brace, who's the chief of staff for Knoxville Mayor Kincannon, said once, this is like setting up a whole new emergency response agency almost. It's going to be, right now 911 dispatches, police and fire and ambulances, and this will be another one like that. It'll be almost a separate thing, but integrated into all of those agencies. So it's a real it's not as easy as just hiring a medic and an EMT and putting them in a car and sending them out. It's a lot more.
Somebody has to own the car. Somebody has to do the hiring. Somebody has to set standards and guidelines.
Somebody has to buy the medical equipment that the EMT would need, and somebody has to pay the EMT. Somebody has to pay the mental health workers. So it will probably not be cheap. They will probably be something where they would want to engage a nonprofit to operate and not operate themselves. And that's one of the big one of the models that the advocates for alternative response point to is called Cahoots. It's in Oregon. It's in Eugene, Oregon. And it is Cahoots is part of a larger nonprofit, and they they do the service there, but they're also really integrated into the 911 system and everything else. So it's a little more complicated than a lot of people might think. The police department was able to get theirs going quicker because they already had police officers. They already had a vehicle, a police vehicle. All they needed really to do was pay for the mental health professional,
right, and the training for the officers who are going to do it and so forth. Well,
and they do a lot of crisis response,
right.
training.
Police officers and that was part of this discussion originally that led to the co-response model, was acknowledging that police officers by default, law enforcement officers, are already responding to mental health crises on a daily basis, right? So this is pairing. That model is pairing them with more trained professionals, and then this alternative response model would be to try to remove some of that responsibility from law enforcement agencies altogether. And I think that's we think about law enforcement agencies in general as being pretty protective of their turfs, because they are in many ways. But I think this is an area where we're actually hearing from law enforcement agencies that they recognize that they are not necessarily the best people to respond to mental health crises, and that they, depending on how something is set up, but they appreciate there being other resources to do that.
Well, Sheriff Spangler has said, the jail in Knox County is the area's, largest mental health facility.
Right.
And Chief Paul Noel, KPD, has said that he would welcome this, and one reason is it would free up officers who were in co-response, could free them up to go back to patrol work or whatever, because as I mentioned earlier, they're more than 60 officers short, and a bunch more are getting ready to retire. So.
Right. All right. Well, so we've got a year or so of task force meetings and everything to work through, and we will cover that, I'm sure, and see what comes out of it. Okay, at the start of this past week, there was kind of a flurry of concern from Knox County Schools employees, or some of them anyway, because the previous Friday, on May 31st, the school system started notifying its 9,000 plus employees of their salary and step levels for the coming year. So this is after the school board adopted a new salary schedule back in April that then was incorporated into the Knox County budget that was passed last month by County Commission. And the school system has presented this accurately as a historic raise, a historic investment in salaries. $39 million of new spending in this year's school budget is going into this new salary schedule. And in general, many school employees are getting sizable raises out of this. The district says that on average, teachers, who make up a little under right about half the total workforce, are getting an average of about 10% raises, although that's going to depend on their seniority level and so forth. And that everybody basically what they committed to was that nobody in the district is going to be making less money next year, and most people will be making not just more, but some significant amount more. But this is all pegged to a study they had done by a consultant, which it was called a market value study, and they looked at all of the positions the school system has, from custodians and cafeteria workers all the way up through principals, administrators, and compared those to other school systems in the state and other school systems in the Southeast. Basically, looking at districts that might be attractive to people who are also considering working in Knox County because of their geographic proximity and size and so forth. How competitive is Knox County's pay scale? And what that study found was that overall Knox County's pay scale was about 8% below market value, but that's an average. And so within that, there were some positions that were farther off from market value than others. And until people got notified of what their salary and step level, and what the step level, that's just your seniority within the district, basically, it's generally reflective of years of experience in your position is your step level. Some people were going to see, they said at the front end, some people are going to see bigger increases than others, and some people might see quite small increases. So maybe predictably, the first set of responses that came in were confusion, frustration, and concern from people who are on the lower end of that, who maybe were expecting to see some nice big raise and found out that actually it's going to be smaller because of the position they're in, because of the number of years they have. A lot of the concerns seemed to come from non-teaching staff, because for teachers, this new schedule is fairly straightforward. They just take whatever step they're at this year, you add one for next year, you look at the new schedule, and that's where you are. But for the non-teaching staff, there were more adjustments to make. And in some cases, for example, if somebody was actually making more money than the market value study showed their position, quote unquote, should be paid, nobody's having their pay reduced, but some people are having their steps reduced to bring them, like maybe they're at step 6, and in the new schedule, step 6 is, a pay level up here, $35,000, but actually the study shows that they, because of their background and experience, should be making $30,000. They might see a very small increase next year to bring their step level in line with where the market study said they should be. And some people are, not surprisingly, not happy about that. Now, so the school system was forced this past Monday to come out and have, over that previous weekend, there was so much hubbub on social media with teachers and employees being concerned and upset about this that by the time last Monday rolled around, the school system called a media conference, essentially, with Jennifer Hemmelgarn, who's the assistant superintendent for business and talent, meaning she is, among other things, over all the hiring in the district. For her to just kind of come out and explain all of that again and say that, yes, most people are seeing big increases, but we knew some people wouldn't. And she also said, no doubt we have made some mistakes here. You have 9,000 plus employees and you're applying this new schedule to everybody. So they set up a Google form for employees to contact them and raise concerns. They had an email address, and they're, just kind of trying to do public education about it. Several school board members at this past week's meetings also said that they had heard from people, and they have heard from a lot of people. Hemmelgarn said, this was as of last Monday, they had heard from about 700 people, and probably more since then, which is a good number. But again, against that total universe of 9,000 plus employees, it's obviously a minority. A
little less than 10%.
Right, yeah. A minority of people who are raising concerns. At Thursday's school board meeting, a representative of school nurses, for example, stood up and spoke about concerns nurses have, because she said that some school nurses who were hired in with prior nursing experience but not prior school nursing experience were given credit, years of credit, when they were hired in, because, you've been a nurse for 5 years, so we'll put you at this step that reflects that. And she said the new steps are now only reflecting their actual years of service with the district, which she said was basically the school system going back on the agreement that it made when it hired them. So that may be an area, that's a very specific case, and that might be one that the district, has to look at and figure out, well, how much how many years of credit do you actually deserve on the scale and so forth. So there's going to be things to work out. But one thing that Superintendent John Ryswick said was that the consultants they hired told Knox County that this was the largest district they had ever seen attempt to update their entire salary schedule all at once in 1 year. That usually when districts do this, they try to phase it in over a couple of years, partly because of the fiscal impact of it. But Knox County was ready financially to do it because they had actually started kind of setting money aside for this in the prior year's budget. And Ryswick said he thought it was important to go ahead and get that money out there as quickly as possible and get raises to people who the study showed needed it as quickly as possible. But of course, yes, when you implement something like that across 9,000 people in many different jobs and job categories and everything else, there are probably going to be some problems. And so, some of those issues will probably get resolved. And also it will probably just come down that some people are just not going to get as much money as they would like to get in a raise because that was what the salary study said for their position. Jennifer Owen, a school board member, said she had heard from one employee who was too embarrassed to tell her own family what her raise is going to be next year because she had sort of built them up as like, oh, I think I'm going to get a good raise next year. And her total raise for the year was going to be $30 for the whole year. So not everybody's going to be happy, no doubt. But apart from some tweaks they might make, it doesn't seem like there's going to be any large scale adjustments because all of this is pegged to this study that they did and said we're going to use this to establish our pay. And of course, school employees, as we've talked about before, are the exception in this year's county budget because all other county employees at the moment are only getting about a 1% raise. They're getting a 2% raise that doesn't kick in until halfway through the year. And so school employees who are getting those lower raises are probably not going to be happy about it. If it's any consolation, they are in line with what all of the other county employees are getting. My guess is that that's not consolation.
Probably not. I'm a little surprised at the number of people who've complained or asked about this. I thought it would be. I would think it would actually be more, because anytime you make any changes to the way you're going to formulate pay or structure pay or anything like that, people get concerned. They get they can show a side of themselves that you've never seen before. And I've had several years of helping on negotiations on union contracts and things like that, and it's
That's right. You were head of the newspaper guild at the News Sentinel.
Well, I wasn't the head of the guild, but I was an officer.
You were on the team,
and I was on the negotiating team. But yeah, people, you start talking about their pay, they get very concerned.
Yes, we do. Don't we all?
Yeah.
Okay, let's talk about, I don't even know what to call this property. It's
a parking lot.
Yeah, it's a piece of city-owned property on Magnolia Avenue across the street from Chilhowie Park, which will probably identify it for lots of people. If you have gone to the Tennessee Valley Fair any time in recent years, there's a decent chance you've parked on this piece of property, but the city has greater aspirations for it now. Scott, what are they doing?
Yeah, the main thing that it's been used for is it's kind of the staging area for the carnival workers and stuff. They put the tractor trailers over there and all kinds of stuff. So it gets used during the fair. So it's about, the fair goes on for 10 days, a few days before, a few days after for setting it up and tearing it down. So it's about a 3-week time period that's used. Other than that, it is not used.
Yeah.
It is just not.
It has been programmed variously over the years. There was one point where when the county library stopped showing movies on Market Square for a year or two, they moved them out there. There's kind of been occasional events there over the years, but it's not heavily used at all.
No.
Yeah, I went to I think it was an Asian festival of some sorts, like lights and lantern stuff.
Oh, right, the Lantern Festival that came.
That was a really good time. I really enjoyed it, but it was at that same property as well.
Yeah, it's it's fenced. It's got a Chilhowie Park gate there. It's connected to the park itself through a tunnel that runs underneath the Magnolia Avenue. But in talking with people who live and own businesses in the Burlington area, the city officials decided that there would be better use for that property. It'd be something that would be used year round, something that can benefit the community. There's not been, the city's been investing in Burlington, but over the past several decades, there's not been much investment in Burlington at all. The city's building a fire hall and a streetscapes project going on there. So
the county built a new Burlington library, but they moved it out of Burlington to do that.
Yeah. That's kind of strange, but anyway, the city has decided to put out a request for proposals. It's out on the streets now. It's an interesting mix. They want a mixed use development, but they said that they talk to people in the community about things that they need, and that this development could contain. One of them is the housing is a big component. Some kind of sports deal, facility, whatever, an educational component. And they suggested, it'd be complementary to, the Muse and Zoo Knoxville, which are, of course, at Chilhowie Park. So, across Magnolia. So, and a healthcare, clinic of some sort, there. So, there's a lot of components to it. One of the things that people had brought up in talking about it, people in the community that I talked to, is that it would be very similar to the Emerald Youth Foundation's complex in their ministry complex in Lonsdale, except that doesn't not include housing. Right. So this one, housing would be a big portion of this. It's a 12 acres, almost 13 acre site. So it's big. It's
it's basically a city block.
Oh yeah, it's a big chunk of property, and so all these things can probably fit on there. It's just what would they be and what configuration and
kind of who can put together. Like you could imagine all of those components kind of needing to be. Maybe a nonprofit like Emerald Youth would be one part of it, and a nonprofit like Cherokee Health Systems could be one part of it. I mean, this is probably a multi-party project.
I think that the city is expecting that the responses will come from teams and not any one entity. Emerald Youth doesn't build house. They do housing.
Yeah,
so that would be one thing, but then you might have somebody who, develops housing. Well, they, don't have any experience developing, sports facilities or healthcare, or whatever. Like you said, they might have to get Cherokee Health Systems or somebody else to partner in. So, I mean, there's, I don't know. There may be developers out there who put together projects like this. I don't know of any. so it would almost have to be in a team environment for it to work.
And it's also worth mentioning just the history of that site, because in recent year, the last couple of decades, it's really just been used for parking. But up through 1999, for a long time, it was also used during the fair as the Midway area, and lots of people who grew up going to the fair will remember that. It's where they had, all of your different carnies and booths with various. I remember one time in the 90s on that side of Magnolia when the Midway was there, I went ahead and paid 50 cents to see the, quote, world's largest rat. And it was a giant billboard of this huge rat with huge fangs and red eyes and claws and everything. And I paid my 50 cents. I walked back behind the board. And it was like a little cage. It's just this little capybara. Which, is, capybaras are rodents. They're sort of rat-like, but they're very cute. And I felt honestly kind of terrible because this little capybara was just sitting there on this fenced-in patch of grass there off Magnolia Avenue. And I remember it clearly. He looked up at me and went, oh. Made me want to stage a little capybara rescue operation. Anyway, that was the Midway. And so if people with more history with the fair are trying to place the site, that's what it was. And they shut that down in 1999 because of noise concerns from the surrounding neighborhood, because there is a neighborhood right around, right across the street there, basically on the other side. And also some concerns about that tunnel that you mentioned under Magnolia. Late at night, people getting kind of rowdy. There were sometimes some issues down there, and so they decided they didn't want to keep the Midway over there. But so it's a piece of property with some history and maybe an interesting future.
And one thing is now this year the fair is going to use it as they have in recent years, but then moving forward, they're going to have to find another spot, and they're negotiating contract with the city now about that. And another thing that kind of complicates this is the city is wanting to either invest itself or get others to invest in upgrades to Chilhowie Park. People in the community want it to be more of a park. Despite its name, it is primarily it is managed as an exhibition center. Mm-hmm. You've got the Jacob Building, and you've got other things there. It's not the city parks department doesn't manage it,
right?
But the people, they want play equipment and green, trails and green space and that sort of thing. So but then there's the problem of the fair, which is the biggest event that goes on there. So doing that and accommodating the fair and all would be a chore, but that's what we pay the city administrators big bucks to do. The one thing too about this that Mayor Kincannon has really emphasized is that she wants to see it people to see it in the context of the entire Magnolia Avenue corridor. You've got all this going on in Burlington, one end. At the other end, you've got the stadium that's under construction near the other end of East Magnolia, and then she's talking about putting in it would have to go to council, but to create a redevelopment district along Magnolia where they could get people, property owners get tax incentives to redevelop property there. There's a lot of potential there. It's a long
underutilized properties on Magnolia Avenue.
A lot of underutilized, and they're hoping that this development will prompt either people who own property now or could come in and buy property in the future and build. And redevelop some of those areas as well. So this is going to be the word they love to use, catalyst.
Right. Yep. Well, that will be interesting to see as well. Okay. Interesting discussion this week at the Knox County School Board. Yes, we are back talking about banning books yet again. It's been a sort of interesting trajectory here over the last 6 months. Our local chapter of Moms for Liberty, the conservative activist group that is well known for essentially trying to ban books across the country. They do other things too, but that's the thing they're best known for. And when we talk about Moms for Liberty, it's always important to remember that this is primarily a political group. It's very heavily connected to the National Republican Party. One of their co-founders in Florida back in 2021 was the wife of the then head of the Florida Republican Party. Of course, she has been sort of bounced out of the organization now, as her husband has been bounced out of the Florida Republican Party because of a sex scandal involving allegations of threesomes and sexual assault, which is an interesting background given how many concerns Moms for Liberty as a group raises about sexual content and material in school libraries. But at the national conference that Moms for Liberty had last year, many of the major Republican Party presidential candidates appeared. Former President Donald Trump, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, former South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley. They were all there, which just reinforces that's, Moms for Liberty is essentially a very partisan, ideological, political group with national funding. And so we have a local chapter of it, and they got reactivated last year and have been pushing to try to remove books from Knox County libraries and really trying to bypass the existing systems that the county has long had in place for challenging books, because they don't think that system works very well. For one thing, you have to be an actual parent or student or employee of the school system to even file a book challenge under that system. And many of the people involved with Moms for Liberty here do not fit any of those categories. Some of them are parents of former students or grandparents of current students, or are just community members concerned, but they don't have standing for the most part under the existing policy to even challenge books in schools. So what they've been pushing the school board to do is kind of set aside its existing system and say, yes, but isn't there just a way we can just ban these books that we particularly want to ban? And they've identified a number of them that are in Knox County school libraries. You can find those on their website. But what you will see if you look on their website, all of this is coming from national groups. In fact, most of our local Moms for Liberty people, there's no indication any of them have actually read any of the books they're trying to ban. They've taken these national lists of books that national conservative, Christian conservative organizations have identified as offensive, and then they've just compared those lists to books that are in Knox County school libraries and said, these people say these books are offensive, they're in our libraries, we need to get rid of them. That's essentially the tack they've taken. They initially didn't get very far. The school board felt like their existing processes were working okay. So then Moms for Liberty came back and sent a couple of emails with specific images from a handful of graphic novels. And to be clear, graphic novel, because I hear people get this confused a lot. The phrase graphic novel is just is a description of a genre. It means a book that is told through pictures and words instead of just words. Think like basically a book-length comic book. That's what graphic novel means. The word graphic there refers only to the fact that these are drawings and images, not to the fact that they are quote-unquote graphic sexually or in any other sense. Anyway, they took a couple of images from a couple of graphic novels, Fun Home by Alison Bechdel and Genderqueer by Maya Kobabe, that have been challenged across the country. These are acclaimed books. They are personal memoirs, both by authors who happen to be LGBTQ. Many of the books that are on these national lists are either by or about LGBTQ authors, and raising concerns about children being exposed to LGBTQ content is one of the things that Moms for Liberty does very consistently across the country. And so they sent just a couple of images to school board members, which was enough to get a handful of school board members to kind of rethink and say, oh, we don't like these sexually explicit images. These are in books in our schools and we should do something about it. So school board member Susan Horn brought a policy proposal this month, and she bypassed the normal system that they use to change board policies. Usually you have to go, that's spelled out, you have to take it through a policy review process. The board has regular policy review meetings. Horn did not do that. She just brought this and basically said, having been alerted that there's this objectionable material in schools, we need to do something about it immediately. And her proposal would have excluded any books or materials with sexually explicit imagery and only focused on imagery from school collections, period. There was some discussion about what does that mean, sexually explicit. Some people said, kissing could be, I mean, let's say there's a spectrum of sexual activity, which can range from holding hands to things that are best left to consenting adults behind closed doors. And like, what are we talking about here? And then the response was kind of, well, like, we all know what it is, right? We know it when we see it, kind of. So that was not really clearly spelled out. But the bigger concern from some board members was that, A, they didn't see a huge urgency here. School is out of session. Librarians don't even come back. School librarians won't even be back at work till the end of July, ahead of the coming school year. So kind of nothing's going to happen in the next month or two anyway. But the bigger kind of looming issue here is that the state legislature also passed a new law, or an expansion of the current law, this spring, which is going to take effect July 1st, which actually identifies a pretty wide range of things that it says are not appropriate for any age level K through 12, and that includes materials with sexually explicit imagery, which is what Horn was focused on. But it also says any depictions of nudity, like it just says depictions of nudity, any depictions or descriptions. So now we're getting into verbal, written materials of sexual excitement or sexual activity, and any depictions of excessive violence or descriptions of excessive violence. All of that under this broadly worded state law are apparently supposed to be excluded from all school library collections now, including high schools, which is where you would tend to find most of those materials anyway. And so, several board members said, we're going to have first of all, this should have gone through policy review. Secondly, we're going to have a broader discussion about this new law. We have a policy review meeting coming up at the end of the month on June 28th. So let's just push all of this to then, talk about it then, and whatever we need to do to be compliant with the new state law, then we can bring that back in July and talk about it and vote on it then. And not surprisingly, given the inherently political nature of all of this, because again, Moms for Liberty is a political organization. They are an explicitly conservative, explicitly Christian, explicitly Republican group. The 4 Republicans who were at Thursday's meeting voted in favor of Horn's ordinance or policy change, basically saying, let's go ahead and ban the dirty pictures now. We can come back and talk about the other stuff later. And the 2 Democrats and 2 independent members of the board all advocated for further discussion at a policy review meeting. And the 5th Republican on the board, school board member Betsy Henderson, board chair Betsy Henderson, was not there at Thursday's meeting. And so the 4 votes to approve it were not enough. On a 9-member board, you need 5 votes to pass anything. So they ended up deadlocked. We've seen this several times on the current configuration of the board, where if one of the Republicans is out of town and they're voting on anything that's sort of more political or controversial, it gets hard for the Republican majority to pass things. This could change depending on what happens in the coming elections. So that balance could shift and potentially give the Republican majority a little more breathing room so that one of them can actually leave town and they can still pass controversial things. We will see about that. But that was the net result of the discussion on Thursday. Horn's proposal basically failed because it couldn't get 5 votes. But everybody understands that probably a restriction very much like the one she was proposing, and quite possibly and probably more strict restrictions, are going to have to be contemplated because of this new state law. And I guess we'll see what conversation comes out of that. I think this law is it's certainly potentially subject to legal challenge. There's a lot of existing court precedent about how far schools can go in banning materials. And certainly you could read this law and think that it oversteps some of those bounds. But, we've seen an awful lot of legislation that raises First Amendment questions in recent years, and the courts are still sorting those out. We will not find out what our current Supreme Court thinks of all this for a while, probably. So in the meantime, Scott, I don't know about you, but I can think of several books that I was assigned to read in high school, like my AP English curriculum, for example, that definitely included sex scenes that definitely included scenes of violence, and how anybody is going to try to sort through what is actually going to be allowed under this law, I think is going to be interesting.
Yeah, I had the same experience. In fact, the book that changed my life was a novel I read as a high school junior. It was assigned to me, and it was Light in August
in Tennessee.
In Tennessee,
Yeah.
in a rural county, or reasonably rural. It was Light in August by William Faulkner. It contained sex. It contained lots of violence, including a castration scene. Being William Faulkner writing about Mississippi in the post-Civil War era, there was a lot of racism. There was use of the N-word. There were just some despicable human beings doing despicable things, and to this day, one of the best novels I've ever read. But it includes all those things, and so a kid who was basically a underachieving jock in high school was inspired to become a reader of literature because of that one book. And
eventually a journalist, which maybe is an argument against this kind of exposure.
There was there are other things that happened in my life in the intervening years, but anyway, I mean, I just that's one of those things that I don't know, and especially at the high school level, thinking that you're going to just keep people from learning these things is, I mean, we want to talk about sex. I learned about sex in 3rd grade in an assignment for school. I was assigned, or we had to do some project, and I remember it was on the 7 wonders of the ancient world. So I did what we did in those days. I was going to look up 7 wonders of the ancient world in the World Book Encyclopedia and plagiarize everything that was in there. So I go.
I hope your edition of World Book was more updated than ours. We inherited my grandparents, and I think it came out in like 1959 or something.
Yeah, ours was a 60s or early 70s version. Mm-hmm. So I guess a 60s version. But anyway, I was leafing through to get to 7 Wonders of the Ancient World, SEV, and I ran across the page of SEX, and I saw sex, and I knew sex was something that was mysterious, that nobody talked about, that was like a dirty word. That's all I knew. And so I went. Of course, I read it, and it had a depiction of, not a depiction, but a description of what the sexual act was. Now, I didn't understand it at all. So, and I wasn't, it didn't make me a deviant or anything like that. It's, but I mean, kids are going to be exposed to a lot of this stuff anyway. Yeah, especially in high school,
right? And especially now, because you're talking about the World Book era, but we're now in the internet era, and like we just know that obviously kids have. I mean, I have teenage children. One of them is actually a legal adult now, but one of them is still a minor. They have access to all sorts of things on the internet. And like all parents, I sort of like struggle with, okay, how much can you have access to? How much not? How much do we worry about these things? But I think that, this is obviously a struggle that has gone on forever, right? How much is appropriate to teach to young people, especially about sex, and when, and so forth. And it's not like we or any other society has probably ever found the magic balance there. But I do think there's something in the way that minors get talked about in political rhetoric these days, which is for political reasons, I think. There's this use of the word children. You want to expose children to XYZ. And when you say children, to most people that has a sort of specific context. We think of kind of younger people maybe under 12, certainly under 10. For the most part, with all of this, we're not talking about those children. We are talking about adolescents. And I think there's a tendency right now, at least in sort of particularly conservative quarters, to kind of try to act like everybody under 18 is the same. I mean, that's what this state law does that has expanded this definition. It says all of these subjects are inappropriate for everybody from K to 12. But K to 12 is a huge range. Yeah. There's a gigantic difference between a 5-year-old and a 13-year-old and a 17-year-old. And, people, whether we as parents want it to happen or not, our children grow up. As they grow up, as they become adolescents, they start to experience biological sexual maturity, whether we want them to or not. They start menstruating. They start having various things happen to their bodies. They start having various kinds of feelings. This happens. And so the whole question is like, how do we talk to people about this in an informed way so that you can kind of tell them this is your body and this is like the things that it can do and that can happen to it. And here's how to maybe, make good decisions and protect yourself and whatever. And I think that some of the discussion at Thursday's meeting highlighted why this is such a popular kind of political trope, this idea that, children are being exposed to inappropriate things, because whatever the thing is that you're trying to restrict or ban, you can accuse anybody who doesn't agree with you of, quote unquote, grooming children, of being pedophiles, of trying to entrap children, and so on and so forth. And what was interesting about some of the public discussion at Thursday's meeting was Dr. Susan Granke, who runs the teacher training program in English at the University of Tennessee. I mean, as she's spoken before at school board meetings, she said, like, I have trained many of the English teachers currently working in Knox County schools as well as across the state. And she said that the data, like, this has been studied, and the data shows and is pretty clear that students who have more access to more information, good quality information about sex, sexuality, sex education, all of those things, make better decisions, actually have later onset of sexual activity, and also are more likely to develop healthy relationships, because that's part of what gets talked about. Issues of consent, issues of, knowing when somebody is doing something inappropriate or suggesting something inappropriate to you. Her kind of argument was knowledge is actually power. When the argument from the kind of book banning side is if we restrict the knowledge, we're going to protect our kids. And the argument on the other side, which again Dr. Granke said was supported by evidence, is that having knowledge actually helps adolescents understand what's happening to them and make good decisions. But board vice chair Steve Triplett, who actually chaired Thursday's meeting because Henderson was gone, he is the most outspoken religious conservative on the school board. The issues that animate him the most are these kinds of culture war issues, and he really kind of showed again the political aim here, because he just flatly said that this should be a unanimous vote. And he strongly implied that anybody not voting in favor was in favor of exposing children to pornography. I mean, that was kind of the implication. Several board members responded with ire at that suggestion, and said that that basically that's not an appropriate thing to accuse other board members of or school employees of. And board member Catherine Bike, who's one of the Democrats on the board, said that, she understands there's a new state law, that they probably will need to make some changes, but she said she really objected to the inherent accusation and the explicit accusation that Moms for Liberty is making, that school employees have some deliberate agenda to quote unquote sexualize children and to groom them and everything, and she said that she thought it was disgusting to accuse school teachers and librarians of that, and that the school board should be the ones standing up for their employees rather than joining in with the people who are beating up on them. So there's obviously more to come on this. There will be that policy review meeting later this month, and then we'll kind of see what comes out of all of that. But, I do think it's always worth noting the political context of all these things. This is the last time that Moms for Liberty made a big push in Knox County was in 2022 during that election cycle. We are again in another election cycle, and this is part of a political strategy being used across the country, and that is most of what's going on with this whole conversation. Speaking of
the election,
we have an election coming up here August 1st. Knox County general election. This is also the primary election for state and federal offices. And Scott, we, of course, are going to be running a comprehensive breakdown of each of the competitive races in that election. We ran our first one this week on the 1st District. The two candidates running for county commission there, Democrat Damon Rawls and Republican Charles Frazier. That is by far the most Democratic-leaning district in the county. One would assume that Rawls is a strong favorite there, but if you want to learn more about both candidates, you can find that on our website if you're a subscriber. And if you're not a subscriber, don't worry. Once early voting starts, we will move all of our election coverage outside the paywall, as we always do as a public service. But we will have many more of those stories in coming weeks. And we also had a little bit of news on the election front this week. There were some endorsements.
Yeah, the East Tennessee Realtors endorsed in local races. Obviously, they endorsed candidates that they think will promote development and housing and that sort of thing, because that's what realtors do. And it was kind of an interesting mix of endorsements. A lot of Democrats on there.
Yeah, unusual number of Democrats.
Damon Rawls in the 1st District, Courtney Durrett in the 2nd, Matthew Park in the 9th. Then you had Shay Jackson in the 4th, and Terry Hill in the 6th. Those are the only ones who got endorsements.
Right, and Terry Hill is the only Republican out of that group. She's the incumbent in the 6th District and is also current chair of commission. And then they endorsed 2 Republicans in countywide races.
Right, yeah.
David Book for law director and Phil Ballard for property assessor. And of course, the property assessor's office is one in particular that realtors pay attention to. Ballard has served in that office before, and so probably they perceive him as somebody who they're familiar with and knows the territory and they can work with.
Yeah, there is that. It's kind of interesting. David Book gets the nod for the law director's office, and of course he spent much of his career in the private sector as an attorney, fighting for neighborhoods and keep them prevent annexation and things like that. So which can go either way as far as your support for housing or housing friendly things. But anyway, of course, they have their own processes and interview people and things like that. Not sure how many, if there were people that they, might have endorsed, but for whatever reason didn't fully participate in the vetting process. I don't know. Right.
There were some races they didn't make endorsements in. I think in the county commission races, it's interesting that they endorsed so many Democrats, and I believe that part of what that reflects, it might partly reflect other candidates not participating in the process. Yeah. I don't know. But also, especially among Republican candidates this year, we have seen some pretty strong anti-developer positions and statements, people who have been very concerned, candidates who are running who have been very concerned about the county's new growth plan and comprehensive land use plan. Angela Russell, Republican candidate in the 5th District, that's Farragut and Concord. She really came out of neighborhood associations who fought against new affordable housing in the Choteau area, and who are kind of pretty strongly anti-new development in that area, period, because they feel overdeveloped and that their streets and roads are overrun with traffic and so forth. In the 9th District, where the Realtors endorsed the Democrat Matthew Park, the Republican Andy Fox has expressed a lot of concern about any new density in development in and around South Knoxville. And density of development, or having the option of density, is something that the Realtors have generally been supportive of. And so I think it reflects probably not so much some ideological bent of the Realtors toward the Democratic Party per se, as that a lot of the rhetoric among our specific Republican candidates for county commission has been at best kind of skeptical of growth and development. And they evidently the Realtors see some of those Democrats as well. Matthew Park, for example, has said he's in favor of more development of affordable housing in and around South Knoxville, and that's the kind of thing that the Realtors like to hear.
Yes, they like to hear when you're in favor. Well, they like to hear when you're in favor of density, because the more houses you can put on an acre of land, the more money that Realtors can make. And you get if you have five houses to sell instead of 3, that helps. But there are a lot of other reasons to promote density, but that's one of them that's, I'm sure, near and dear to the hearts of the Realtors Association. So.
Yep. Well, it was an interesting set of endorsements. And of course, the risk for the Realtors in these kinds of things is if you endorse somebody and their opponent wins, then, you have somebody on county commission who may not, may have started out not super favorable toward new development and now is going to be twice as resistant to hearing from the East Tennessee Realtors. But, these are the risks that you take when you make endorsements. We also had statewide endorsements from Planned Parenthood, including in our local legislative races.
Yeah, the no surprise that all the candidates they endorsed were Democrats.
Yeah.
And this, even though, they specifically said they could have endorsed, people of either party, but Republican candidates are generally almost uniformly anti-abortion, and the Democratic candidates are also almost universally pro-choice. So it's no surprise that they went with pro-choice candidates. They too have a big process, and I mean, they endorsed every Democrat who's running in Knox County. As far as these are the state races for the state Senate and House of Representatives, there was one Democrat who did not get the endorsement, Lauren Carver. She's running in the 16th district. But that might also be a case of didn't go through the process. Theirs is a very involved vetting process.
Right, and it is about abortion for sure, and access to reproductive health services, but also about commitment to public health in general, and Medicaid expansion and all of those things. Right. That because Planned Parenthood is a comprehensive health organization. Everybody thinks of them in terms of abortions, but they provide many other health services in addition to that. And of course, in Tennessee, that's all they provide. They cannot provide abortion services in Tennessee because abortion is illegal here. Okay, well, we will certainly have much more to come on those August races and any endorsements that come down the line in the coming weeks. For now, we can look ahead to next week And Scott, City Council is meeting on Tuesday.
City Council is meeting on Tuesday. One of the things that they'll be considering is kind of a new tack for the African American Equity Restoration Task Force. It was formed, 3 years ago to try to go after grant funding for that would benefit largely benefit African American community in Knoxville. They counted the $46.2 million grant that the city received, and they worked on with the city as a city administration as a partner to apply for the federal grant that's going to help pay for greenways and other connectors in East Knoxville. But they're going to give away, but this is kind of a departure because this time they're going to take city money and $150,000 and distribute it to 18 nonprofits, community organizations that serve primarily in the African American community. Almost none of these is exclusively African American, but it's kind of aimed toward helping the African American community. And we're talking about, and a lot of these are organizations that have been around for a while. Connect Ministries, East Tennessee Housing Development Corporation, Unique Academy, which is kind of interesting organization. The Bottom. So all these groups are going to get grants ranging from $5,000 to $25,000, and so that's going to be on tap. There are also some of the other things on the agenda. The final reading of the capital improvements plan is on there. Several contracts for homelessness services, basically continuing this. Most of them are continuing the same services, just new contracts. And then the city council's time to do the final voting on the placing a historic overlay on the Sun Sphere. So to prevent future mayors from, I don't know,
or future Bart Simpsons from knocking it over.
That's right. You can't knock it over, and it prevents a future city government from painting the globe to look like Bart Simpson.
Right.
That would be much more likely.
Knoxville's own sphere, like the Sphere in Las Vegas. Can you imagine if the exterior of the Sun Sphere could have digital projections on it?
Well, it could.
You could pay money.
You can still do that with a historic overlay.
Right, is there an ordinance against having a wig shop inside there as well?
No. I don't think that would be prevented.
I think somebody needs to get on that just for the punchline.
Yeah. Tourist attraction.
Yeah, it would be perfect.
Sell Knoxville wigs. Okay, well, so we also, this coming week, speaking of the election, have a couple of candidate forums coming up at 6 p.m. on Tuesday, June 11th. Knox Pride, the local LGBTQ advocacy group, is sponsoring a candidate forum for the 9th District County Commission race. And the reason they're sponsoring one for that race in particular is because Knox Pride is based in South Knoxville. They are in the 9th District. And also possibly because one of the candidates there, the Democrat Matthew Park, is actually gay. He is, if he were elected, he would be the first openly gay county official elected in Knox County. They have invited all of the candidates, so it's at 6 p.m. Tuesday at South Press at 3615 Chapman Highway. I am actually going to be moderating that event, and the last I heard, as of last night, only Park has responded, and so this may just be a conversation between me and Matthew Park, but if either Andy Fox, the Republican, or Stacey Bryan Smith, the Independent, comes, they will certainly be included in the conversation. And then Thursday, June 13th at 6:30 p.m. at Fourth United Presbyterian Church in North Knoxville, League of Women Voters and a host of other organizations are sponsoring a candidate forum for the 2 state legislative races that have competitive primaries in August. And so that is the State Senate 6th District, which has 2 Republicans running, incumbent Senator Becky Massey and challenger Monica Irvine. And then the State House 15th District, which has 2 Democrats, incumbent State Rep Sam McKenzie and challenger Daisha Lundy, who's currently county commissioner. She is not seeking re-election to county commission this year and is running for that seat instead. So again, first of all, I'm moderating that one too, just so anybody knows. We don't have any monopoly on moderating forums. It's just when people ask us if we're willing to, we always try to help out. Perfectly happy to have other people moderate forums too. But
I noticed they always ask you, not me. I think anyone who has listened to our podcast knows why. So
I have been at events that you have moderated, Scott, and I think you have done a fine job. But yes, either of us are available. We work for free. Because I think I think forums are important. They're an important part of the electoral process. They're a great opportunity for people to come out and see candidates in person and really hear from them and also ask them questions, because usually at these forums, there's an opportunity for audience questions as well. So that one, again, will be Thursday, and it'll be for those candidates for the State Senate 6th District and State House 15th District seats. So come on out and join us. Don't make me lonely. There are more of those coming up in future weeks, which we will talk about when we get to those. And then also this week, Scott, Planning Commission is Thursday.
1:30 p.m. Thursday at the main assembly room of the City County Building. And it's their monthly meeting. A few interesting things on the agenda. The Knox Encore, which is the proposed golf centric facility, be like Top Golf is the one around here that most people associate with. But this is a new venture that is going to be built in right off I-275 in North Knoxville, and they are going to be seeking to rezone their property there from industrial use to highway commercial use, so they can do all these things that they need to do. And the other things that are on the agenda, the Thunder Mountain, which is a big development that's planned for South Knox County. They're coming back with taking another stab at getting areas rezoned. Most of it for residential use, some commercial use along Chapman Highway. This is down almost to Seymour.
And that's been a very controversial development among local residents.
Yes, talk about people who fight over density is essentially what that is, and so that's that's scheduled to come back again. Sometimes these projects will come up and they'll get postponed, and then they'll get coming again. They'll get postponed again. So it's on the agenda. At this point, it has been postponed. And then there's also an interesting Yassine Toureau has been in the news a lot lately. He is the owner of Yassine's Falafel House, and he was recently arrested for participating in the pro-Palestinian demonstrations at not really demonstration, makes it sound like a lot worse than it was, but the pro-Palestinian demonstrations at the University of Tennessee campus. Anyway, he's also a developer now, and he is wanting to build a couple of duplexes out on property that they own out almost in Concord. It's almost to Concord Park on Westland Drive. And it's just interesting because I see he's doing it.
Also interesting because that is an area, as we were just saying, where people have tended to resist any kind of new development at all.
Yeah. Well, this is on the east side of Concord Park, which is a little bit less contentious than stuff on the west,
right,
to the west of there. But again, it's one of those. It's a special use because the zoning doesn't automatically allow duplexes. But again, and then seeing this a lot more. Some of these other proposals, a lot of duplexes going in there. We've had a lot of talk about middle housing, and that's what this is. In fact, there was one proposal in here where a developer or a property owner wants to take a single-family house and convert it into a duplex. So that's the first time I've seen that in a long time. So.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, we'll be back next week to talk about all of those things and anything else that happens in the interim. Thanks, as always, to Lord Seth Barber for his production work here at Barbarian Productions. Our theme music is by Will Wright. And hope you have a great weekend. We'll talk to you next week.
Welcome to Compass Points, the weekly podcast for CompassKnox.com. CompassKnox.com is your best source for news and politics in Knoxville and Knox County. Your hosts today are Scott Barker and Jesse Mayshark, the founders of CompassKnox.com. You can find their daily in-depth coverage and subscribe at CompassKnox.com. The Compass Point podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Almost an Agreement. Almost an Agreement is a layman's attempt to get a handle on the workings in government and politics that we deal with every day. Check them out at almostanagreement.com or subscribe for free on your favorite podcast provider. If you'd like to learn more about the topics discussed on today's podcast, go to CompassKnox.com and subscribe for in-depth coverage and much more. And many thanks to William Wright for composing our theme song. Compass Points is a partnership of Barking Shark Media and Barbarian Productions, and recorded by Lord Seth A. Barber at Barbarian Studios, Knoxville, Tennessee.